So it was really a situation where if a child was on the streets, as Stephen was talking about, as many were in the post-Civil War era, there were orphanages for them to go in if they weren't overfilled, but there were no means to remove an abused child from a bad situation like Mary Ellen, and it really didn't matter how bad it got.
Tell us about her rescue.
Well, Etta Wheeler is to be credited for that. She was a missionary working at St. Luke's Mission, a church in the city, and she learned about her through a landlord of the building. And she made it her obsession to save this child. She investigated the case. She tried appeals to the police, and they listened, and they were sympathetic, but they felt they could do nothing to help her because they had no power. And the courts were of no help. She tried to appeal to them, but they said the person in danger or in harm's way would actually have to be presented to them, which would require that Mary Ellen be taken from the home, which there were no laws to support that type of action. So since nothing else worked, she appealed to her church. They couldn't help. So finally, on the suggestion by her niece, Etta Wheeler went to her last resort, the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, Henry Bergh, and he was very well known at the time for his sometimes outlandish efforts to save abused animals of all kinds. So she figured if he can save animals, surely he can save this innocent abused child.
You better pursue that a little bit more. What's the connection? How can you go to the ASPCA and rescue a child?
Well, when Henry Bergh is out on the streets of New York and he's stopping horse cars to rescue a broken-down nag that's pulling an overloaded horse cart, or he's going out to the docks and arresting entire shiploads of crew that are transporting turtles on their backs, when he's doing things like that, Etta's only idea here is that perhaps this man who has the power to go out and rescue animals can go and can try to make some effort to save a little child, because she is as innocent as these animals are. She's as powerless to change her own situation. So this was really a very last resort for her. So she laid out a very detailed case, one that was so detailed and impressive to Henry Bergh that he felt, why not? I'll try. This is it's very well substantiated. He sent an agent to her home, to Mary Ellen's home, to pose as a census taker and verify the abuse. And within 24 hours of the reporting and his verification of her abuse, his agents had taken Mary Ellen out of that home.
Was he able to do that legally? Was he able to get the law behind him to go in and take Mary Ellen out?
Well, that's where Elbridge Gerry, his attorney, came in handy. This was a volunteer attorney whose grandfather had actually served as Vice President of the United States. This attorney probably could have done anything he wanted to, but he volunteered his time to the SPCA, and he was a great child advocate as well. So he pulled up a writ of habeas corpus. I'll let Stephen tell you a little bit about that. I think it's very fascinating what he did to save Mary Ellen.
Elbridge Gerry was a brilliant attorney. As Eric said, his grandfather was a Vice President of the United States. He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. And he was the governor of Massachusetts who reapportioned Newton County to look like a salamander, and thus the term gerrymandering, that we often call it gerrymandering, but it's gerrymandering. And again, he was a very influential attorney. He was a brilliant attorney, and he found a loophole in the Habeas Corpus Act of 1861, which basically said if someone is being held against their will as a prisoner, then that person could be brought into the court for a hearing to present their case. And I'm told that the original intent of that law was to allow runaway slaves who were captured by bounty hunters in the North to be able to be brought to court, to plead their case in court. That was the original intent of that Habeas Corpus Act. And under a writ of habeas corpus, Mary Ellen was brought into the courtroom. Officer Christian McDougal of the New York Police Department actually picked her up at the house and brought her into court.
And that even could be applied to children.
And that was applied to children. It was the presumably the second time that was used. There was another case where it was used, but the case was dismissed, and this is the first successful use of this to bring a child into court.
Was the trial what we would call today a media event?
Oh, the trial was incredible. The transcript, and we have much of the transcript in the book, read like high drama. At that time, the photojournalists were coming into play. The Civil War, Matthew Brady, Lewis Hines of Wisconsin documenting child welfare. Well, Jacob Riis was a photojournalist, and Jacob Riis's reporting of this case was phenomenal. all of the local newspapers, and at that time there were many newspapers in New York, they all carried in their front page headline the story of Mary Ellen. For literally weeks, the front page told of the story of Mary Ellen. There are even 2 songs written about Mary Ellen by a songwriter named Henry Keynes, and I don't know how popular these are, but they're very compelling songs about the case of Mary Ellen. So the case was known far and wide and had a great impact on the public.
Known far and wide, media event, but did it set any precedents, or was it just a one-time kind of emotional response to a particular situation and thereafter forgotten?
Actually, on leaving the courtroom, Etta Wheeler took Henry Bergh's hand and said, "Can there now be a society for the prevention of cruelty to children?" And Henry Bergh took her hand and said emphatically, "There will be one." And in December of 1874, the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children met for the first time. So within months, a Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children was founded, and that spread like wildfire throughout the country.
I'll ask each of you this question separately, responding from your different backgrounds, but Stephen, let me start with you. You're a specialist in the care of neglected and abused children. What did you learn from this case?
The message of the Mary Ellen case was clear to me, and that is you just can't worry about all the needs of all the children all the time. You tend to get frustrated. You have to focus on one child at a time. And the message of the Mary Ellen case was these individuals working together changed the life of a little child and actually started the movement. And if it were not for Etta Wheeler's concern about this little girl, her individual concern, Mary Ellen wouldn't be rescued and this whole movement wouldn't start.
Eric, how about you? What did you learn from this?
Well, I'll tell you, Stephen kind of hit it on the head. What I realized, and I've been working now with a lot of CASA groups, the court-appointed special advocates that work with abused children. I go and I do speaking events. So I tell you, I learned that one person with a will not to give up can make a big difference. And when several people like that get together, they can really change the world. And that's exactly what happened in the case of Mary Ellen.
Eric, you are a professional writer. As I read through this, it just seemed to me that this was a story that was made to be told. And did you find it a real pleasure? Well, pleasure in the sense of being a writer. I'm sure there were parts about the story you didn't find very pleasurable. But was it a real treat to write this story?
Well, it was, and it was amazing to me. In my mind, there were a dozen other writers out there at this very moment writing the same book, because I couldn't believe that after 100 years, nobody had written a book about Mary Ellen. So it was my assumption in my mind that there were all these writers out there working on this book, and I just had to get this thing finished and get it out because I wanted the story told. And I kind of wanted to be the first to do it. And it turns out after a year and a half, we're still the only ones who have told the story.
Why is that, do you think?
It's child abuse, and I think that many people would rather not necessarily read about it. We have sold the film and television rights to this book, and the movie is currently being shopped, and that would be exciting too, to let more people have access to it, people that don't necessarily like to read. But it's just a way to get this story out, let people know that there was a first time and how it came about, and maybe it'll inspire them to get out there and take that one step to help somebody and maybe change the world themselves.
Will you write the screenplay?
I think I'll leave the screenplay to somebody else that can write a better screenplay. I've written smaller screenplays, but I think this would be quite an epic, and I'd like to see it done perhaps a little better than I might do it.
Well, okay, you'll have to let us know if that comes to pass, but we'll have to leave it at that. Thanks to both of you for joining us today. You've been listening to Eric Shellman and Stephen Lazaritz, authors of Out of the Darkness, the story of Mary Ellen Wilson, published by Dolphin Moon Publishers. What happened to Mary Ellen Wilson after her rescue? When no suitable relatives could be found to care for her, Mary Ellen was placed in the Sheltering Arms, which was a home not for young homeless children like Mary Ellen, but for troubled adolescent girls. Etta Wheeler, the church worker whose persistent efforts resulted in Mary Ellen's rescue, again came to the child's aid and persuaded the court to release Mary Ellen to her care. Etta sent Mary Ellen to live with Etta's mother, but when she died, Mary Ellen was taken in by Etta's sister and brother-in-law, with whom she thrived. At age 24, Mary Ellen married, bore 2 children, and cared for a foster child. She died on October 30th, 1956, at the age of 92. This is Talking History.